Hi, Dr. Carol Francis here, and whether you have experienced severe trauma, either at the hands of some cruel individual or natural disaster or serious complication, or you just have very extreme anxiety and fear that you may not know what to do, or depression that just cripples you, I want you to consider a repetition compulsion and the information that might enlighten you to be able to intervene on your own behalf. This is Dr. Carol Francis, and I'm very glad you could join us today. What you will be introduced today is really just a beginning of a process, and I take individuals through very intense psychotherapy to be able to accomplish what we're going to discuss today. So be very forgiving and loving towards yourself, because you're entering into a phase of forgiveness and self-love. You're entering into a phase where you will begin to shed the skins of embarrassment, shame, chagrin, feeling weak, feeling stupid. You'll begin to move into realizing that those are also you creating kind of a self-abuse that actually repeats the trauma and abuse that you have experienced prior to this moment. Now, in understanding repetition compulsion, it will be very interesting for you to know that this is nothing new and has been explored for well over 100 years, first by Dr. Sigmund Freud and later by Dr. Bessel A. van de Kolk, C-K-O-L-K, Kolk. And he is related to EMDR, which is a treatment very specific to treating trauma. There are many treatments that treat trauma, and my approaches actually include many therapeutic interventions that are all about following your own particular pacing, personality, and style, as well as the style of trauma and the way in which you are repeating that trauma inside of you. So this is an individual path, and you want to work with someone who can work with you in that individualized path. But it's important for you to recognize that many people who have been exposed to trauma or situations that are quite catastrophic for you emotionally, mentally, personally, and physically, that you will actually be kind of reenacting your victimization over and over again. And that is a normal and understandable response. There is nothing to be ashamed about or feel guilty or embarrassed about repeating inside of your minds, your emotion, and your body what exactly was traumatized inside of you. Now, the reason I don't want you to feel badly about this is because there is such a thing as accomplishing a kind of mastery by rehearsal. And we master things by rehearsing them. We do it if we're into sports or doing some sort of performance. We rehearse and rehearse and rehearse, and that helps us master the skill. And there is a compulsion inside of us that's wonderfully healthy to master trauma, so that we become victorious over an event or a person or a situation as we master it in our mind. But what happens along with that mastery is that we tend to repeat the damage that was done over and over again. We repeat what they said, what they did, what they experienced, what we felt, what the events were, what occurred. Now, a second reason why we repeat it that's very healthy is that it is usually so horrible what we have gone through that we almost don't believe it ourselves, and other individuals have a hard time metabolizing the truth of how horrific certain experiences are. And so we are trying to prove to ourselves that, in fact, we did go through that event. And in fact, we do have a reason to feel very traumatized and upset by it. And so those are two very good reasons why you would repeat the image and the experience inside you over and over. One, to master it, and to convince ourselves of the authenticity of it, because even we ourselves don't believe that something that horrible, that embarrassing, that horrific, that unsettling, that startling, that unsurprising, that out of control actually happened to us. Which brings me to the third reason why we tend to repeat over and over again the events in our mind is that we're attempting to gain some sort of control. Now, this relates to both mastery and also to actually believing that we went through it. Control is something that is typically robbed of the individual that actually was in the midst of the experience, because when we're experiencing something so traumatic, We are genuinely out of control. It is happening to us. Now, perhaps we were in control of moving into the event or moving into the relationship or moving into the situation. Perhaps we were even in control of continuing our exposure to the situation. But most of the time, we are seriously not in control for a myriad of reasons, which you really need to have a lot of love and forgiveness for, as well as just recognition that you have faced a situation where you were not in control, you were not in mastery, and it happened to you, and now you need to recover from something that wasn't your fault. And that is the third reason why we rehearse it, is to get a sense of control. The fourth reason why we rehearse it is that we do re-examine to find our own fault in the circumstance. What did I do wrong? Why did I deserve this? What could I have changed? What could I have done differently? And so we look at our own blame and our own fault, both as a wish to master and control it, as mentioned before, and also to come to terms with how horrible this actually did happen and how out of control we actually were. But also because we can't stand the thought that we were out of control, we want to find where we could have been in control. So in the future, we can avoid that same situation, because this is all about wanting to avoid a future trauma. But it's also a way of kind of putting on you the heaps of the horrible circumstances that occurred to you, because it's almost more horrible and out of control to believe someone else did this deliberately than to believe that you yourself somehow are to blame. Remember, when someone else did this to you deliberately and you are not to blame, it furthers that feeling of not being in control. So these are really excellent reasons as to why you go over and over and over what it is that you are anxious about, what trauma you experienced, what fears that you have. And it will catapult you, sadly, into a state of depression, chronic anxiety, re-traumatizing yourself, where your physiology and your brain chemistry actually experience it as if it's happening all over again. And this repetition of the events that you rehearse in your mind or in your dreams or in the moments of panic contribute to this being prolonged inside of you. And the series of talking about the repetition compulsion will help you understand not only why you're doing it, but some ways to move you away from having to repeat the trauma when the trauma has stopped. This is Dr. Carol Francis. Please stay tuned for the next in this series, and do also feel free to contact me at drcarolfrancis.com. Take care. Be loving and kind and patient with yourself. We're all learning, and we're all recovering.